Superman had 17 animated shorts released theatrically, and he had 2 movie serials that were theatrically released in installments. However, Superman had still yet to have a feature film to call his own. That was until November 6th, 1951, when DC released Superman and the Mole Men. Welcome to the summer of Superman, and hopefully you can join me as I go on a journey through Superman's theatrical roller coaster ride. I've previously discussed Superman's 2 theatrically released serial films from 1948 and the one from 1950. And while those were live action and they were theatrically released, they were serials. Superman still did not have a feature film, and neither did DC. Well, today I am going to tackle not only Superman's first feature film presentation, but DC Comics' first feature film presentation, that being 1951's Superman and the Mole Men. Superman and the Mole Men was released on November 6, 1951, and is only 58 minutes long. The screenplay was written by Richard Fielding, which actually is a pseudonym for Robert Maxwell and Whitney Ellsworth. Robert Maxwell being the one that did most of the screenwriting. Whitney Ellsworth is just the DC comic book editor, and he's sort of the unofficial liaison for DC in terms of movie studios and Hollywood. Superman and the Mole Men was originally designed to be a litmus test for the potential for a syndicated Superman television show. The litmus test turned out to be successful, which meant The Adventures of Superman went on to premiere in fall of 1952, starring the same 2 leads from this film. In terms of the cast, it's pretty much just a bunch of character actors playing your townsfolk and playing an angry mob. However, among them you do have Frank Riker, who was in the original King Kong playing Captain Englehorn, and I'm a big King Kong fan, so I just wanted to mention that. And weirdly enough, you have Munchkins from The Wizard of Oz in this movie playing the titular Mole Men. The only actual Superman characters in this film are Superman himself and Clark Kent, obviously, as well as Lois Lane. And Lois Lane in this version is being played by Phyllis Coates. Now, Phyllis does a fine job as Lois Lane. She truly does. However, she does feel a little more dismissive and more aloof than Noel Neill did in the serials, in my opinion. Phyllis Coates did reprise the role of Lois Lane when The Adventures of Superman first premiered in Season 1. However, she was later replaced in Season 2 by her predecessor, Noel Neill. As for Clark Kent and Superman, they are being portrayed by the legendary George Reeves. Now, George Reeves does give Superman more gravitas. When he has monologues or speeches, you really feel like they mean something. However, on a personal note, this might be a little hot take, especially if you're old enough to have lived in the pop culture of the 50s. I am not a big fan of George Reeves' portrayal of Superman, but more importantly of his portrayal of Clark Kent. I respect everything George Reeves did for the character of Superman in terms of television and movies. He made Superman this pop culture icon at a time when comic books, and specifically superhero comic books, were kind of under scrutiny as glorifying violence and teaching kids bad lessons, similar to how like GTA and video games used to be about in the early 2000s. So I have a lot of respect for everything that George Reeves did for the character of Superman. However, for someone that was born in the late 90s, I'm personally not a big fan of his portrayal, at least within this film and the select few episodes that I have seen from the Adventures of Superman, primarily because of the Clark Kent side of things. There doesn't really seem to be much of a nuanced difference between Clark Kent and Superman in George Reeves' version of the character. For the glasses disguise to work, Clark Kent and Superman have to have very different personalities. Clark Kent needs to be this kind of clumsy, somewhat naive reporter, while Superman needs to be this humble, super powerful, but honorable human or Kryptonian being. And here you kind of get both of them being humble and honorable. You know, Clark Kent's not very clumsy and naive in this. He's just sort of Superman with glasses on, and then he runs out of the room and comes out the same door dressed as Superman, essentially. However, I will stand by and say that George Reeves does do a really good job on the Superman side of things. Now on to the plot. It is pretty simple here. Lois and Clark go to visit the small town of Silsby to report on the world's deepest oil well. During the course of the night, these small, bald, furry, humanoid creatures crawl out from the depths of the oil well. They scare a 70s-something old man night watchman into having a heart attack. The mole men then explore the town out of curiosity. However, the townsfolk believe they are there to take over. Therefore, the townsfolk try to stop these creatures from wreaking havoc by creating an angry mob. Superman quickly realizes that these creatures are just kind of innocently exploring a world that they had never discovered before, and they're not really here to harm anybody. That old night watchman was an old man with a heart problem who got spooked and had a heart attack. He wasn't attacked by the mole men. So Superman must play a mediator between the angry townsfolk mob and the innocently curious mole men. Oh, and the mole men might be radioactive as well. It's a story that ages really well and is just kind of a universal story for that reason. You have townsfolk who are understandably scared by these unknown creatures that have come into their world. And as far as they know, they could have killed that night watchman. They didn't because it was just an innocent heart attack. But what do they know? They don't know that. And you have the mole men who are just innocently exploring this world that they had never discovered before. They're not there to harm anybody. But it's understandable why each side acts the way that they do. So in the end, you just get this really nice, simple story about tolerance and not judging a book by its cover. And it also has some anti-imperialist themes thrown in there as well, especially when you have Superman saying lines like,
"Don't forget, you invaded his world. You sank a pipe 6 miles into the ground."
Plus, it's a very simple way to get around the Superman problem. And what I'm referring to is the problem of trying to develop a character that is strong enough to defeat an all-powerful, superhuman, Kryptonian being in Superman. And in a simple story like this, you don't have to worry about the Superman problem because it's not about someone trying to stop Superman. It's about Superman trying to stop humans, and in this case the mole men, from destroying each other. Because if they can't get along together, neither of them will be able to live in the world that they want to live in. Story aside, however, it does not feel like a feature film, especially when you view it in the modern world that we live in today. It does very much feel like a glorified episode of the Adventures of Superman. And it doesn't help that they took Superman and the Mole Men, re-edited it by editing out a chase sequence, editing out all references to the Mole Men in general, as well as taking the score out and replacing it with generic production library music, and then they released it as a 2-part episode titled The Unknown People. So overall, Superman and the Mole Men is a very simple 58-minute feature film that is very quick and easy to watch. However, There is no real nuance between the Clark Kent performance and the Superman performance, and it can never really escape the feeling of being a glorified episode of the adventures of Superman, especially when viewed in retrospect. So it gets a flat line from your comic book movie historian. It's worth a watch, especially if you're a die-hard Superman fan. And if you want to check it out, it is still available to purchase on Apple TV and Amazon. And weirdly enough, it is a special feature in most Superman box sets as well as collected editions. I weirdly have like 3 or 4 versions of this movie, and I never once actually sook this movie out. So thanks for watching this video on Superman and the Mole Men from 1951. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can join the summer of Superman and hear me talk about the original superhero blockbuster in my next video. Also, smash that like button if you enjoyed this video, and always stay super.